Hey YouTube, Shadow of Logic here. Another video about the discussion between Anon and Scientology. I had a couple of requests for my last video to make up a video about cults. And while I had an outline for a couple of different things, I thought, well, maybe this is more important. So I went ahead and jumped in and started doing some research. I want to read to you a couple of things, the definitions of a cult, talk about Scientology, and whether Scientology is a cult or not. It's referred to as a cult quite a bit, but if we've seen some videos, the BBC panorama, you can see what the Scientology reaction is to being called a cult. They despise being called a cult. Xenu TV recently uploaded a radio interview between an anti-Scientologist and a Scientologist, and the Scientologist pretty much flipped out when the anti called him a cult. He likened it to walking into your house and asking if he could urinate in your sink, of all things. So we know that Scientology does not like to be called a cult, and who can blame them? The name cult is a pretty derogatory statement in a lot of different worlds. Certainly, if you use cult like a cult following. Some people say that certain lovers of certain movies is like a cult following. Maybe certain music lovers. Maybe Kurt Cobain had a cult following of his music. That's in a little bit different light. But when you use the word religious cult or cult in reference to a religion, it can have some pretty derogatory terms. So you really can't blame a Scientologist for not liking being called a cult. But let's look at some logical conclusions here, and let's talk about some definitions. A definition of a cult typically refers to a cohesive social group devoted to beliefs or practices that a surrounding culture considers outside the mainstream, with a notably positive or negative popular perception. Well, I guess one can consider what Scientologists believe to be outside of the mainstream. You know, there's written documentation about the Xenu things and about the different things that they believe, and one looking from the outside could perceive that that might be outside the mainstream. Mainstream being said as probably in the United States, probably Christianity, maybe in other countries, maybe it's Muslim beliefs, maybe in Indian countries it would be the beliefs of Buddha. You know, those would be the mainstreams in certain areas of the world. So it could be concluded from that statement that Scientology is outside the mainstream. So, but that's not necessarily a direct answer. I want something that's going to point to it a little more directly if I'm going to call Scientology an actual cult. So I did a little more research, and there's some cult experts out there. There's people that deal with this all the time, and they have put together basically a checklist of what cults are, or that you can use this checklist to try and identify a cult. And I thought it was pretty interesting. I'm going to read through a few points here kind of quickly. A powerful leader who claims divinity or a special mission entrusted to him or her from above. Revealed scriptures or doctrine. Deceptive recruitment. Totalitarianism and alienation of members from their families and or friends. The use of indoctrination by sophisticated mind control techniques based on the concept that once you make a person behave in the way you want, then you can make him or her believe what you want. Slave labor, that is, the use of members on fundraising or missionary activities for little or no pay to line the leader's pockets. Misuse of funds and the accumulation of wealth for personal or political purposes at the expense of members. And exclusivity. A couple other definitions brought up by other folks are isolating their surroundings, providing them with instant acceptance, keeping them from seeing competitive or different issues on the critical issues of the organization. So I'm going to take some of these one by one. A powerful leader who claims divinity or special mission entrusted to him or her from above. Now, I would say, in my mind logically, that L. Ron Hubbard considered himself a powerful leader. Anybody that can write what he wrote, say what he said, would have to be considered a powerful person. Now, whether or not David Miscavige considers himself a powerful person or not is really beyond my expertise, but I think you can answer that in your own mind. Revealed scriptures or doctrine. Certainly the Church of Scientology has doctrine. Certainly they have scripture. They have revealed new scripture as of recently and kind of thrown the old aside and brought new to light. So certainly they have scripture. Deceptive recruitment. This is a point that I think deserves a little bit of discussion, because I think a lot of people believe that when you go to look into the Church of Scientology and take one of their stress tests, it is not necessarily brought out to you what the end results are of their teachings. And you've got to be higher up. And even the writings of LRH have said that if you get into the OT level 3s before you're ready, you could die. So that has to be deceptive recruitment, that they're not telling everything up front like any other religion would be. Totalitarianism and alienation of members from their families. We all know about how they've alienated and disconnected people from their families. And the church has suggested that to happen by members. So I think that's got to be a check mark on the yes column. The use of indoctrination by sophisticated and mind control techniques. I think some could consider the auditing technique to be a technique which is trying to control or take over a person's mind. I think that's a logical conclusion. Slave labor. The use of its members on fundraising or missionary activities for little or no pay. Well, the whole Sea organization is just about working for nothing. I hear they make $50 a week. I'm sorry, I'm not going to work 18 hours a day, 16 hours a day, whatever it is, for $50 a week to line the pockets of the people above me. On one hand, the church is going out and buying millions and millions and millions of dollars of property. On the other hand, they're paying their people a pittance. So I'd call that slave labor. Misuse of funds and the accumulation of wealth for personal or political purposes. Well, I would say that the money they're putting together, the 15 or 20,000 people that are really paying the bills in this organization, that money is being put towards gaining approval by the governments through this IRS thing in the United States and other governments worldwide, and also trying to infiltrate education, all sorts of political powers, local authorities as far as police, city councils, all those different things. I believe that money is being put to that use, as well as the substantial amount of funds, some say in the $25 to $35 million a year range, that this church uses on litigation. So I would say between the slave labor and the misuse of funds, that's a big point by being put towards a cult. The exclusivity, that they are right and everyone else is wrong. The leader of the church, David Miscavige, has stood in front and said they need to clear 6 billion people. Obviously, they think they have the only way. So, that being said, I think a logical person could say, you know what? Scientology is a cult. There's no ifs, ands, or buts. I don't think there's any way around it. I'm sorry you don't want to be called that, but you know what? Like the old saying, if the shoe fits, wear the shoe. Scientology is a cult. By any stretch of the definition, Scientology is a cult. So I think from now on, instead of saying the Church of Scientology, I'm just going to say the cult of Scientology. Now, can they be a religion? Absolutely they can be a religion. They can be a religious cult. We've seen them before. We saw it in Waco. We've seen it in other places. They can be a religious cult, but the end result is they're a cult. Until next time, Shadow of Logic, signing off. Take care.